So good afternoon. This is the Philadelphia College Prep Roundtable University series. We will be focusing this series speaking today on the Pennsylvania Act 101 program and what it is, what it does, how it helps students and going on to college. We have Elizabeth McCloud, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, it's your show.
Thank you, Tom, for the invitation to share with PCPR today on Act 101. I'm, of course, familiar with the Philadelphia College Prep Roundtable, but have not had a chance to interact with you in this way in the past, so I'm appreciative of that. My name is Elizabeth McCloud. I'm the Vice President of State Grant and Special Programs with PHEAA, and I have several staff with me here today. So before I jump into talking further about PHEAA and the Act 101 program, I'd just like to give each of them a chance to identify themselves for you and share their role within State Grant and Special Programs at PHEAA as well. So I'll start by kicking it to my colleague Maggie, and then Maggie, you can pass it along to Kelly, and Kelly to Jeremy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just to mirror what Elizabeth just shared, very excited to be with Philadelphia College Prep Roundtable. I spent several years in Philadelphia after graduating from high school. I think a total of 10 years in the city. And so huge fan and miss it all the time. But really happy to be here. My name is Maggie Keefley. I'm the Director of Program Integrity and Consumer Advocacy here at PHEAA within the State Grant and Special Programs Department. And under my reporting structure, we are responsible for all the administration and the operational tasks that go along with administering over 20 programs through PHEAA. So Act 101 is one I think that we hold very close to our heart across the entire department. So the more we get to speak about it, the happier we are, because we get to get the message out, and hopefully that ends up translating to more support for these students who need it. So thanks for having us. Kelly?
Good afternoon. I'm Kelly McConnell. I'm the manager of the program management team here in State Grants and Special Programs at PHEAA. So my team handles a lot of the technical administration for the PA State Grant program, as well as all of our boutique special programs as well. And we also have Jeremy on the call, so I will kick it over to him as well. But thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me here. My name is Jeremy Miller. I've worked with the Act 101 program at PHEAA since about 2015. Been a great experience. I got to present last week for the 2022 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Conference at PHEAA on a similar topic. So glad to see you all here to hear about Act 101.
Thanks, Jeremy. Okay, so I don't want to assume that everyone knows where we're coming from when we talk about being from PHEAA and just in general administering the Act 101 program. So let's just speak real quickly to the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency and what PHEAA is within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So PHEAA is a national provider that was created in 1963 and works not just with post-secondary aid programs for students, but also providing financial aid services around loan guarantee and loan servicing, all types of financial aid processing, and then also outreach to students, as well as administering, as Maggie said, a relatively large and continually growing suite of programs on behalf of the Commonwealth. The earnings that PHEAA has support our public service mission and pay for the operational administration side of all of the programs we administer. So when money is appropriated, for example, to the Act 101 program or to the Pennsylvania State Grant program and the other programs we administer, every dollar that's appropriated to those programs is going to students and to schools to support higher ed, and all of the administration expenses at PHEAA are covered through PHEAA's other business earnings. So that's where we're coming from as we talk about administering the Act 101 program. I know that the Philadelphia College Prep Roundtable, that you exist to increase the number of students who are college ready and to help them matriculate and eventually graduate. And the Act 101 program was really created to take students who maybe aren't as college ready and make sure as they're matriculating that they persist and make it through to graduation. And so that's what we're going to talk about here today. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. We have a brief PowerPoint to share with you. So the Act 101 program, it was created back in 1971. I know that Tom sent out our 50th anniversary video along with the invite for today, and that was just celebrated last year. So over 50 years now that this program has been assisting students across the state. And it didn't initially start out as a part of PHEAA's program. So it was a part of the Pennsylvania Department of Education until more recently. And it's only really the last decade or so that PHEAA has been administering the program. So this program was transferred to PHEAA about a decade ago, but the purpose of the program has had continuity across the 50 years. And I would say that it's a program that, you know, has seen years of growth and years of contraction. And right now we're in a time of growth where we are seeing renewed interest from institutions. We're seeing renewed support from the General Assembly and growth in funding behind the program. And so we are eager to spread the word about the students that are currently being assisted through this program and see if additional post-secondary institutions are interested in joining us as we move forward. I'm not sure who all is in the audience today from post-secondary institutions and how many folks are joining us from the side of helping students before they get to college. But I think this will be helpful information to you from either perspective. You know, if you're helping students who are in high school and trying to help them prepare for and apply to institutions, it'd be helpful to be aware of this program and maybe point some students towards institutions that provide these type of services. Because what the program does is it takes students who meet some economic and educational qualifications where they're not coming from a setup that guarantees success in post-secondary study, and then providing very tailored specific support services to the students to help get them to the finish line with their college career. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through the slides here. But the way that the program accomplishes this is by providing funding directly to institutions. So this isn't a program, we have our flagship program, the Pennsylvania State Grant Program, where award dollars are awarded directly to students. This is a program that provides funding directly to schools to support all of the services that help get students across the finish line. So just to give a little bit of background about how institutions become a part of Act 101 and what the eligibility criteria are. Of course, it's Pennsylvania funds, so it is for schools that are located in Pennsylvania, and the schools have to be providing degrees that are authorized by PDE, and then there's an application process for approval with PHEAA. The application process is not onerous for Act 101, and once a school has been admitted into the program, then it's a very straightforward reapplication on an annual basis. My understanding from the history of Act 101 is that there was a time in the years when it was administered by PDE where there were fairly stringent reporting aspects. There is still reporting that we collect from schools nowadays so that we can appropriately divide up the funds amongst the participating institutions, and so that we can report out as we are required to on the outcomes of the program and who is receiving funding and being assisted. But it's not nearly the level of reporting that was once a part of the program. So if you are from an institution that maybe had participated 20 years ago in Act 101, it's a different structure now, and it's a simpler structure now. So I want everyone to be aware of that who maybe has some historical knowledge, but not recent knowledge with Act 101. When schools participate with PHEAA and administer an Act 101 program, the schools do have some skin in the game. So part of the Act 101 program's budget does have to be covered by institutional funding, and then the funding from the Commonwealth can cover the remaining costs as it is available to schools through the per capita awarding process. And you can see there on the slide that for newly approved institutions in their first year of participation, it's a lesser match than in the subsequent years, where there's a 25% budget amount that needs to be covered by the institution. I should mention that there are a couple of schools currently participating in Act 101 that I saw on the PCPR website are member institutions for your organization as well. So I think the ones that I noticed were Lincoln University and Westchester University. So your colleagues at those institutions would also be able to speak to their experiences and being partners with us on the program. So, as I said, at the core of Act 101, it's helping economically and educationally qualified students to be successful in higher education. And part of the way that that happens is by having a stability in the services that are being provided. And so each program is required to have an Act 101 director. And it's not, that director doesn't have to be a full-time position that is solely responsible for an Act 101 program. So we do have directors at some of our institutions participating where the Act 101 program director is also involved with other services or programs that are available at a school, or maybe is teaching classes and also being an Act 101 program director. But there does need to be someone overseeing the services provided in that way. And the funds, I've mentioned this already, that the funds are provided to schools on a per capita basis. And that is done based on the number of students that are being served at each program. And so the allocation divided by the number of students served each year causes a little bit of fluctuation in those per capita awards from one year to the next, even when there aren't large fluctuations in funding. But then sometimes, like this year, we see a big jump in funding, which I'll get to on another slide, and that can really increase what's available at an institution. You can see here on the screen that there are requirements for a minimum number of students served to be a part of Act 101, and then there is a maximum number that can be funded at a school. I want to speak to that minimum number served because I do think this is an important component in that the services that are provided through Act 101 programs, obviously there are important aspects around advising and tutoring and so on, but there's also a peer aspect to this where students are receiving support, for example, from upperclassmen in the program who help them become a part of their campus community and feel like they belong there, and hear some tips on how to become a part of the community and be successful. And then they help each other and can end up mentoring younger students that come along. And that's part of what leads to the success for students in the Act 101 program. So that minimum count, there is some importance to that. When schools receive funding through the Act 101 program, there are guidelines as to what those funds can be utilized for. And this slide gives you a general idea of that. A couple of things I want to touch on here. One is that the very first bullet point there is that the per capita amount that a school receives can provide for the Act 101 program director's salary and benefits, for example, because without that staff structure in place, you just don't have the structure and the continuity in a program that you need. So obviously that would be allowable, but then you can see all of the different things beneath that. So some of them are obvious supports to students, such as tutoring, students having access to special events that are purely for them, and particular supports in the way of materials, technology, etc. But some of these expenses are things that really do go more to the overall structure of the program and to provide support to the staff who are assisting students. So there's a wide array of ways that schools use this funding, but they all are supporting that same goal. I also should mention that there are some limitations in areas where schools are not able to use Act 101 funds. For example, the funds cannot be used to provide scholarships or grants to students, and they can't be used to offset expenses that students have that would have been built into the cost of attendance that the financial aid office is using to award other types of assistance that go directly to students. So federal Pell Grants, Pennsylvania State Grant Awards, and so on. So there's a certain amount of coordination that takes place between the financial aid office at a participating school and the Act 101 program director to make sure that there's a clear delineation between what expenses are covered through Act 101 and what things are being counted under that cost of attendance and potentially covered by other financial aid awards. This slide gives you a recent history of the available funding to the program and then the per capita award that schools received for their participating students. And this is solely showing you the Commonwealth appropriation each year to the program. And of course, what jumps out when you look at these 3 years is that most recent year at the bottom of the screen. So for the current academic year, the appropriation to Act 101 was more than doubled by the General Assembly to $5 million even, so 112% increase. So that gives an indication of the current interest and support that we're seeing from members of the General Assembly, some of whom are former Act 101 students, and so are very well aware of the good outcomes when students have the opportunity to benefit from these type of support services that are offered through Act 101. You can see how that's impacted the per capita for this year with having that more than doubling in the appropriation. I do want to mention, though, that the first year listed on this screen, the 2020-21 year, in that year, we did have the $2.358 million in appropriation of Commonwealth funding, but there was an additional $5 million in federal CARES Act funds that was also made available to Act 101. And that was divided up and provided to the participating institutions on that same basis as is used to determine the per capita. And so that provided a one-time influx of funding. And that, of course, was helpful to schools, but they weren't able to use it to create new supports as part of their program that would require an ongoing appropriation to continue providing them. So schools use that CARES Act funding more for one-time improvements, for example, to the facilities that they use to serve their students, or for technology investments that they'd be able to reap the benefits of for multiple years. Whereas now for this year, where we have the $5 million in the appropriation, while there's no guarantee, of course, with any Commonwealth appropriation that it couldn't change from year to year, but we all know that once an appropriation exists in the state's budget, it is more difficult or less likely that it will decline in subsequent years. And so now with the increase this year, schools will have a little more breathing room to be able to think creatively about how they want to use the increased available funding to beef up the longer term supports that are in place for students in the programs. We do have a really nice variety of schools participating in Act 101, and I think that's important to be aware of, especially if you're on the high school side of this and helping students sort through what they're going to be doing after high school and where they might want to attend. So please note here that we do have Act 101 programs at both 2-year and 4-year institutions. So there are participating community colleges, there are public 4-year institutions in the PHEAA system. Of course, Lincoln University is the state related, but then we also have a very healthy number of private colleges participating in the program, and even a couple of business, trade, and technical schools right now. And so regardless of the career path that students that you're advising might be pursuing, there's a school somewhere in Pennsylvania that is participating in the Act 101 program in these various sectors. And so that is good to be aware of. We do have a listing of, and I think, Tom, you said you had emailed this to the group, the updated listing of this year's participating institutions. And so you can see exactly which schools those are. And then that's also printed in the back of our annual report each year as well. So let's talk a little bit about student eligibility within the program. You know, again, this is funding that's going to institutions, not directly to students. So PHEAA doesn't interact directly with the students from an application standpoint. The institutions work with students, inviting them to participate in their programs. But there are some guidelines around what students can be in the headcount for that per capita award at a particular college. So the students, of course, have to be Pennsylvania residents as a Pennsylvania aid program and have to be enrolled at least half-time in a program that's going to get them to a credential. But the part I really want to focus on is there at the bottom of the screen with the definitions of the educational and economic requirements. And this is something that we work closely with partner institutions on. So let's start with the economic requirement, which is where we work the most closely with institutions. The requirement is that students have to have a household income that's less than or equal to 200% of the poverty level in the year when they are first admitted into the Act 101 program. And to give you an idea of what that is and how we measure that each year, we're looking at the year's income that is part of the student's financial aid application in that year. So students would be filling out the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, and a student in entering college for this current 22-23 academic year, when they filled out the FAFSA for 2022-23, they would have been reporting 2020 income information. And so that year's income information and that year's poverty guidelines from the federal government are what is used. So as an example, a family of 4 with 2020 income, if they have income under $26,200 as a family of 4, that's the poverty guideline. So 200% of that would be $52,400 for a family of 4. So that gives you sort of a general idea of the household income that is being considered. And what we do at PHEAA is that we provide 2 different reports to institutions participating in Act 101. One of the reports that we provide lists every single student who has listed that school first on the FAFSA, lists the household size and the income that's available on the FAFSA. But then we have a second report that's narrowed down to just the students for that school who, based on their household size and family income, look to be within that 200% of the poverty level. So that assists schools in knowing which students can be invited to participate in Act 101 and qualify for that per capita count towards the school's award. So that's the first part of the student eligibility. And then the second part is the educational requirement. That one's a little more left up to the institution because it can vary from one school to the next. And that's because the educational requirement is that each student has to be judged as being unlikely to succeed educationally at the institution. So really what we're getting at there is that the student is determined to be unlikely to get to a 2.0 GPA on a 4.0 scale without these additional support services. And it's really up to each institution to measure for their particular school, looking at a student's high school academic transcript, SAT scores, other measures, how they would determine which students fall within that qualification. It's also a qualification that could vary for students, for example, depending on what major they're planning to study. So, you know, a student enrolling in a STEM major might be looked at in a different way than if that same student was pursuing something where they had maybe had like stronger scores in high school. So the schools do have a certain flexibility there with that second criteria. But this chart here, and I think this is our last screen for you, this just gives you a snapshot from last year. So from our most recent completed year in the program of the head count of students served at each type of institution. So you can see there the breakdown of students who were served at 4-year versus 2-year schools, at the business, trade, and technical as compared to private colleges, and so on. And I think that's interesting to see, but probably what's most important is the point there at the bottom of the screen, which is just an example of the outcomes for students who benefit from Act 101 services, which is that during the last program year, our Act 101 students had higher course completion rates in taking developmental courses than peers in the general undergraduate population at those same institutions who weren't participating in the Act 101 program. So the support services that schools are providing are definitely making a difference for the students who agree to participate in these programs.